Judge had said that he because he's a lunatic, it means it didn't exist.
Yeah, this is Donald a judge Trump decides cases based on emotion.
Okay. I think emotion is hot at the table, and it is not emanating from me.
That was a little foreshadowing of the clip that I'll play for you in full. But first, of course, this comes from Fox News' The Five, where the wonderful Jessica Tarlov is the one rational voice and one liberal host on this show. And it was good to see her point out there that not just in this discussion, but many, many times, emotions are driving the argument. Often very irrational emotions are driving the arguments coming from the people who sit around her at that table while she's calmly presenting facts. And it's interesting, especially given that these are the individuals who proclaim to put facts over feelings. I think the phrase went not so much. Lots jam-packed into this discussion. Here it is.
Do you think the business community is actually looking at it? She says it's no big deal, but Kevin O'Leary says it's an atrocity.
I'm not sure. I think we'll have to see how it plays out on the appeals court. And that's what everyone is waiting for to see, right? Because the state will have to prove exactly who was the victim in all of this. And I'm assume they've thought about this long enough that they have a good answer for that. But basically, everyone who is defending Donald Trump in this, from Kevin O'Leary to some folks here, is saying it is okay to falsify your business records, to issue false financial statements, to commit conspiracy for insurance fraud.
Well,
when he goes out there,
where's the fraud?
The fraud is, and David Brooks lays this out really nicely. He was on a weekend show. He says you can't have three sets of books. You can't have the books for the bankers, so that's Deutsche Bank, who, is happy with all this. Then you have your IRS books, and we know that you're supposed to tell the IRS the truth. And then you have a set of books with the real numbers, I guess, which is what Alan Weisselberg had.
But
Donald Trump continually.
There were three sets of books. Where do you get that from? Where do you get that from?
That's part of what Judge had said that he present. Because he's a lunatic, it means it didn't exist.
Yeah, this is Donald a judge Trump decides cases based on emotion.
Okay. I think emotion is hot at the table, and it is not emanating from me. So, since Donald Trump ran the first time, he has been making this argument: if they could do this to me, they could do this to you. The average person is not inflating their wealth by $800 million to $2.2 billion. They're not sexually assaulting women. They're not storing classified documents in the toilet. They're not fomenting an insurrection. Mar-a-Lago, you remember the documents?
Let's focus on this case. We can do a lot.
You always do that.
No, Jessica, you're doing a laundry list.
Really? You just say Judge Edgar on this too.
When we're focused on one topic, we're focused on one topic. And yes, it does matter.
Falsifying your business records.
And then they just dogpile. And we see this a lot. Number one, we see a lot the attempt to shut up Jessica Tarlov when she's making really good points that could frazzle the viewership, and trying to make her stop being able to communicate those very accurate and compelling points. But then also the justification for cutting her off is often you're going off of the topic at hand. But when Trump comes up, just like how they reference all of their criticisms of Biden often whenever he comes up, it's fair to say this story comes within the context of a broader story about Donald Trump. And let's talk about that broader story, which is what she's doing there. But in a bunch of clips, since we watch a lot of them, most of y'all know this, that allegation will be levied at Jessica Tarlov. Stop, you're going off topic, when she'll bring up something about Donald Trump, especially the civilly liable rapist element of Donald Trump. And they very much do not want to discuss that, which I think betrays a lack of an ability on their part to defend Trump as a complete candidate. They can defend him through the lens of nicely selected cherry-picked stories about some random person here in this city, and that's the left, and that's why you need Trump, or some other story over here that if you just focus on the details, then I can sort of make Trump look good over here. But if you just talk about him as a complete candidate, individual, and former president, they really fall apart in their defense of him, which is why they say, stop, you're going off topic. Don't reference all the different descriptions of him and his record. Then the other interesting thing about that clip was the fact that Judge Jeanine Pirro references a narrative about Judge Arthur Engoron that they created as justification for that narrative, essentially. So let me explain what I mean there. She says that this fraud decision is ridiculous. So then Jessica Tarlov points out that it's not ridiculous because of reasons, and in those reasons, she cites something that the judge said. Then Judge Jeanine Pirro says, well, the judge is deranged. But the reason that you've explained him to be deranged is by saying that this fraud case has been ridiculous. But you haven't proven that the fraud case was ridiculous. So you're relying on the assumption that we already either think the fraud case was ridiculous or we already think that Engoron is a lunatic. But you haven't been able to prove either by itself, right? And then we see this a lot in the right wing. You build a narrative, then you reference that narrative as proof of future arguments, but you never prove the original narrative. Okay. And then the third thing I wanted to mention on this was that it's really important to bring up to people if you're in arguments, as we saw play out there, the point that any other person, you would never try to defend the things that are being alleged here. So just without Trump in the conversation, do you think it's appropriate to falsify business records? No. If there are laws on the books about that, as there are, let's prosecute them. People are okay with that when the name's not Trump. Or if you steal classified documents and then obstruct investigation and refuse to give them back after a bunch of requests and then potentially damage, destroy evidence to cover up the fact that you were doing that, should you be held accountable? Everyone would say yes. But you insert the name Trump in there and then they have a problem. Would you find it meaningful and disturbing if you were talking to somebody and found out they were a civilly liable rapist? People would say yes. If Joe Biden were a civilly liable rapist, do you think Fox News wouldn't have a problem with that? They would, I can tell you. Or if a Democrat tried to prevent a Republican president elect from becoming president after a free and fair election, do you think that Republicans would not feel prosecution is justified and think that that president should have presidential immunity? And attempting to block the peaceful transfer of power would be totally fine in the case where a Democrat's trying to do that to prevent a Republican from becoming president? Of course not. They would want that individual prosecuted. Imagine Barack Obama trying to block the peaceful transfer of power and trying to install himself as president for more years after his term to prevent Trump from becoming president. They would have lost their minds, and so would have I, because that would have been horrible, like it was when Trump tried. So that's also important to point out. Hey, are you really saying you shouldn't be held accountable for business fraud? For defrauding different institutions within the financial sector and the state of New York? Is that really something you think any old person can do? Obviously, the answer is no. One other thing I wanted to show you, since I brought up the civilly liable rapist description of Donald Trump, him being found in a court of law to have raped E. Jean Carroll. And that, of course, took place in a civil trial in front of a jury. And because of this, Mitt Romney, the Republican senator, is saying he will not vote for Donald Trump.
I will not be voting for former President Trump. I must admit that I find sexual assault to be a line I will not cross, and the people I select to be my president. But I also disagree with a number of the character issues that the president has demonstrated.
And that is good to see, for sure. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. You can become a member at lukebeasleyshow.com/membership.